Number 4, how will people who have not been directly touched by historical events assess the seriousness of the virus? Okay, you're watching 24/7 pathos-oriented media, and you're asking yourself, are they overreacting or am I? I see this in my students. They don't know how to gauge their response. It's like the matchstick effect, right? You get 3 matchsticks, for all of the same length. You tell somebody that one's a different length and they will argue, or they'll take it seriously. Okay, so there's a concern here that people's awareness of the gap between their observations of reality and what they're hearing about reality will make them recede, will make them not trust their own judgment, which leads to the next issue, which is, what will this do to people's attitudes towards science and expertise? So some of you will be familiar with the Enlightenment dare articulated by Immanuel Kant, Vashes Aklarang, horrible pronunciation, but dare to think for yourself. Don't let the priest tell you if you're a good person, you figure that out. Don't let the doctor tell you if you're healthy, do you feel healthy? What we're seeing now is a shift toward follow the science, listen to the experts. If you haven't read the experts, you ought not talk. While that comes from the Enlightenment ethos, I hope you can see how it reflects a turning away from that dare, almost a kind of a ironic endarkenment. Okay, now these next 2 points are connected. The first one is, a lot of people are saying things like, what kind of society do we want to have when we come out the end of this? As if you can create a society or social structures like you would decorate a pizza. Okay, you'll often hear people who will have gone through really exciting historical moments that fizzled out, and that will be the one that knocked the wind out of their sail. So I'm interested in what this will do, because you have that on the one hand, but on the other hand, you have the rising class consciousness. People are talking more about homeowners, renters, employers, employees than ever. It's usually not until you get burnt that you join a union, unless you're raised by a union family. Now I'm seeing my 19 and 18-year-old students become unionists. You may be seeing the same. So there's the thoughts and observations. They're my contributions to Deborah Lopton and Murdoch. Our School of Arts works on avenues for research. Now I'm going to refine this. So, cultural trauma. So cultural trauma is effectively the idea that trauma is not a necessary and automatic response to horrible events. It's something that requires a process of realization, of sense-making, of almost consensus, which is why you can have some horrible events, such as the Spanish influenza, which for whatever reason, we are only now treating as though it's something that we all have knowledge of. Whereas you could have something which is far less catastrophic, which is seen as the historical moment of becoming for a people. So Stomska, excuse my pronunciation, he uses it as an analogy. So he says, in medical parlance, this term trauma refers precisely to impact of a sudden event, leaving long-term destructive effects on the body. You extend this to psychiatric discourse, so it means a similar long-term destructive impact on the personality. Just like you could get your arm blown off, you could have your willingness to associate with strangers at a pub blown off of your personality. Okay, so he says, it may well be worthwhile to give the term yet another connotation, to apply it to the social domain, to look for destructive effects on the body social. So I hope you can see how this is quite functionalist, quite Parsonian, almost Durkheimian. So the idea is that trauma is a social fact. It is shared and widespread among the members of a certain group that acquires facticity or externality with respect to each of them. And it is perceived as imposed on and constraining their actions. If you read those words and you think about how we're talking about COVID-19, it's imposing and constraining our actions. It does have a facticity about it. If you tell somebody that they're overreacting, they'll respond with, no, 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 you are mistaken. You are underreacting. There is a normative, coherent response that people are digging into at the moment. So, continued. So this is Alexander now, different author. So he is interested in cultural trauma as a kind of theory, a theory that can bring together discussions of anime, discussions of cultural lag, a kind of umbrella. So he says, societies can experience massive disruptions that don't become traumatic. Your institutions can fail to perform, schools can educate people in the wrong direction, okay? Governments can be unable to secure basic protections. All of these problems can be major, really, really, really detrimental over a long period of time, but they can go without too much notice except for by academics and commentators. It's when the public start to look at it and the experts and commentators start being listened to and speaking to the public that it becomes this public consciousness matter. It emerges at the collectivity as a social crisis. So for him, cultural crisis requires recognition. Now this is more Weberian, okay? So for claims of trauma to be made by what Weber called carrier groups, so listen to the experts, right? The thought leaders, the authorities, the influencers. There are groups out there, and I'm not saying that they get together and decide what it is that they want to do, but some of them do, such as the medical experts, that we are waiting to hear for word from. They are the ones who are leading the way, right? So they recognize it as crisis. We recognize their authority in saying so. You have yourself a consensus that we are going through crisis, okay? Likewise, if people start to use other words rather than crisis, people will have consensus for those other words, okay? One is trauma. So cultural trauma requires the development and circulation of narrative across domains. Here are examples which I've spotted in the wild and snipped and I'm sharing with you. So I know that you can find evidence for what you're arguing on the internet, no matter what it is. But I think you'll find these will be the kinds of things that you are all visiting already anyway. The Harvard Business Review, that discomfort you're feeling is grief. Okay, you're not just out of work, you're grieving the loss of normality. Okay, you will have people saying what the whole population is going through at the moment is an experience of trauma. Now you have to ask yourself, in what other circumstances do we medicalize everybody's experiences? You can have an obesity pandemic, sure. You can have a real pandemic, definitely. Could you have a trauma pandemic? Okay, there's the pandemic, and in response to that, everybody starts saying, okay, I'm now more tired. I am now more prone to nervousness, all of these different things. Certainly, okay, I think it's easy to imagine, but to diagnose a population in a matter of weeks is another matter altogether. It's a matter of the narrative emerging in real time. It's not cultural trauma that emerges after the fact, but rather at the moment that it's taking place. So you can see this with what we can learn from the collective trauma of these uncertain times in Times Higher Education. This is from Murdoch University in the middle here. My students, when they go on that site, the first thing that they're visited by is a depiction of the virus. So if you think about that, there is no reprieve. Okay, now I'm going to start tying this all together with systems theory in a moment. Okay, so this is Alexander again. Societies can experience massive disruptions that, oh, pardon me, that's gone in the wrong direction. Here we go. Here's how the system's affected. So this representational process where the leaders, the thought leaders, the carriers start getting listened to, and we all start to say, oh, okay, yep, we all know what's going on. I will listen to you. That is the narrative. Let's dig in. It creates a new master narrative of social suffering, and this can occur differently across institutional arenas. So for my PhD, I used Lumenium social systems theory, which is labyrinthine and difficult. But one idea of it is, well, let's focus on the different social systems and let's see how they interact with one another, okay? If you want to be empirical about it, you could say, well, sure, let's let kids out of high school in year 10. And then you turn around and you look at the medical system and see if that has an effect, yeah? So here are some of the social systems where you can see an effect for the COVID-19 virus. So civil society, there are debates going on between the interests of the individual and the collective internationally. People who usually would never discuss these kinds of things are. For the first time in my lifetime, I had a prime minister appeal to my sense of national duty. Okay, I made it a long time without that happening, unfortunately. Politics, parliaments suspended, daily conferences, and leaders judged on weekly performance. One week, Boris Johnson is the voiced. The next week, no, it's somebody else, because things are moving so quickly. Again, it's this narrowing of the horizons, this precaritized mind where we are living very much in the present. Media, news, and advertisements are absolutely fascinated. You look at the backdrops of these different things. You look at the use of the virus and quarantine and whatnot by people trying to sell their wares. Okay, the virus has spread, not just through the literal world, but through the media world. Newspapers are closing, social media and communication technologies are booming. I could go on, right? You guys are getting the point. The creative industries are in crisis. Online art is fascinated with the virus. In the sciences, previously ignored experts are now taking center stage. Who knew we had so many epidemiologists, and who knew that we admired them so much up until this moment? They're generating models while simultaneously acknowledging that they're insufficiently suited to account for the complexity and the known unknowns. And as we're seeing at the moment, academics are being encouraged to comment on something that they usually don't have expertise in. We're seeing a return of the ecological, I would say, misanthropic nature strikes back argument, which is humans in some manner deserve this if equilibrium is to be reached. And most notably, COVID-19 awaits you on web pages, and it lurks beneath every conversation. Whether you're talking to somebody on the bus or a neighbor, or it doesn't matter really who, you both know that lurking underneath whatever you're talking about is a shared topic, right? How often do you have a shared topic which lingers beneath everybody's conversational choices? Not very often. Okay, now I'm going to start bringing this to a close now, with just a few more slides. So if we take the discussion of trauma, I just want to show you how it is somewhat useful rather than just the attempt to throw more papers on the pile. So Stonka and Giddens, they list typical responses to uncertainty. Now, if you take these responses to uncertainty and discussions of trauma and you apply them to the virus, okay, you could have done really well for yourself. You could have seemed clairvoyant back in February. So no particular order, but usually in this particular order, the first is pragmatic acceptance. Keep calm and carry on. Business as usual. You can still go to the footy, okay? Every day school and business, every extra day of school and business counts. This is what we've seen here. This is what we've seen in the UK, followed by sustained optimism. Things will turn out okay. It's just like the flu. In China, there's no real worry of a pandemic. We don't know how contagious it is. In America, we're going to be back to normal by Easter. That's followed by cynical pessimism. Concerns narrow to the present. Now this is the interesting one. This is the danger for describing, pardon me, an entire population in terms of trauma, okay? If people realize that they're going to be going through hard times, they make allowances. It's okay to sleep in.